And hello everyone, welcome to this week's video upload of the last board in chapter 8 of Grandmaster Ronghua Sandwich Horse Defense Treatise. So without further ado, let's start the board. Central Cannon and the Sandwich Horse Defense. As mentioned in this chapter, Red would choose to develop both his cannons as the 5-6 cannons very early in the game. Now this would be a very defensive prone approach. And since the cannon had moved away, Black would develop his chariot. Now, at this point in time, since the red horse has moved away, it was recommended that Black play c2 equals to 1 for the 3-step tiger, so that the Black chariot would now be able to have an open line for development. Now, would it be a good idea for Black to play p3 plus 1 at this point? Because it would inhibit the development of the left red horse. So there were quite a few variations that were given, but generally speaking, this would not be a good idea at this point in time. And since p3 plus 1 was played, Red would take the opportunity to develop his left chariot. And it was recommended that Black play c2 plus 4 to form a blockade. Being defensive with e3 plus 5 would not be an option because the red chariot would now get very ideal development and would now be able to patrol the riverbank, and red would be able to red would have many options to continue with, like playing p3 plus 1, etc, etc. So that is why c2 plus 4 would be a good idea. And since the cannon was now at a very offensive position, Red would try to retreat his horse to try to capture the black cannon. And this would force the cannon to move again. But where should the cannon move? Advancing the cannon was not discussed in the book. Instead, there were 3 moves that were played. Amongst the 3, c2 minus 2 was suggested to be the best move of all. Now it would seem that Black would have lost tempo by advancing and then retreating the cannon, but this should not be the case because Red had also advanced his horse and now retreated the horse. So c2 minus 2 is advocated. c2 minus 4 would not be a good idea because Red would be able to advance his chariot to the riverbank as shown in a similar variation just now. So Red would have a very good development of both his chariots and control a very important riverbank at this point in time. And c2 minus 5 would be an even worse option because Red would have a very nice move with c6 plus 5. Now the cannon would now be threatening to capture the black horse and also block this black horse from protecting the central pawn, thus allowing the central cannon, red central cannon, to capture the central pawn. So to deal with this issue, Black can only play c6 plus 2 as perhaps his best option. And once this were played, and once the cannon left the cannon rank, it would be very vulnerable, and Red would play r8 plus 7 to threaten to capture the black horse. Now, as can be seen, Black's right flank would now be very congested, and the issue of freeing the black chariot and the black cannon from this pin will be a very big headache for Black. So that is why c2 minus 2 is advocated. And Red would sacrifice his pawn to try to gain tempo. Now this is a very commonly used tactic in the opening whereby a pawn is sacrificed to gain tempo. I have mentioned this in the several videos on Xiangqi opening theory by Grandmaster Liu Dianzhong. So feel free to see the videos that were mentioned there. Okay, as mentioned earlier, with r2 plus 4, black would now have a headache on how he would deal with this pawn. Since it had crossed the river, was it important for black to try to protect it? But the black defense on the cannon rank is still immature, and there was nothing that there was. It would be very vulnerable and fragile to attack. So if black tried to advance his pawn, red would gain some tempo with r2 equals to 7 to attack both the horse and the pawn. And the black elephant would be moved so that the pale corner cannon can now protect the black horse. However, red would capture the pawn, and seeing that the pawn had used up 3 moves, 1, 2, 3, black would have lost a little bit of tempo at this point in time. And black would play r9 equals to 1 to develop his other chariot, whereby red would push b3 plus 1 to try to develop his horse later on. So at this point in time, the red pieces would basically have better positioning, and red would still have his advantage. So that is why advancing the pawn to try to limit the development of the left red horse would not be advocated. Instead, c2 equals to 1 should have been played. This would be in the main line, and since c2 equals to 1 had been played, red would choose to play p7 plus 1 to develop his left horse. p3 plus 1 would not be a good idea because black would be able to play p3 plus 1 also. Now this left horse would now take up much of red's efforts to try to be developed. So black can be very satisfied with this outcome, and which is why red should have played p7 plus 1. So this would be the position of discussion for this board. Okay, there were 2 major variations that were discussed. The first would be r2 plus 6, whereby black would try to apply pressure on the horse to prevent it from being developed. The second major variation would be p7 plus 1, which would be black's attempt to try to counteract red's p7 plus 1, so that black would be able to develop his horse also. So with variation 1, in this situation, it would be recommended for red to play r9 plus 2 to protect the horse, so that red would have the option of playing c6 minus 1 followed by c6 equals to 7 should the black chariot play r2 equals to 3. And if the black chariot did not move, red could have the option of advancing his horse forward, because the black chariot would now be protecting the red cannon. It would not be a good idea for red to play b3 plus 1 now, as will be seen. If red chose to play p3 plus 1, black could develop his other chariot as a rank chariot. And if the chariot were able to get to this file, the cannon would now have trouble being developed. Okay, and black would attempt to free his horse with a pawn sacrifice. And at this point in time, because the black cannon was still on the cannon rank, it would now be protecting the black horse, and black would be prepared to play c6 equals to 7 to attack the red chariot, and thus black would gain a little bit of tempo. So that is why p3 plus 1 at this point in time for the double-headed snake pawns will not be a good idea. r9 plus 2 would be a better option. And black would have to play r2 equals to 3. If not, if black played another move, the black horse would be charged to the riverbank, and once the left horse was able to be developed, red would have a considerable advantage in this situation. Now, after r2 equals to 3, it now would be the correct time to play p3 plus 1. Now, there were 3 sub-variations to the major line. The first would be p3 plus 1, the second would be a prophylactic move with a6 plus 5, and the last move would be just to immediately retreat the cannon. Now this would be the worst option of all, because once the cannon left the cannon rank, black would counter with c6 plus 5 of its own for a skewer. So red would most certainly lose material at this point in time, because the cannon would now also be targeting the red chariot indirectly. So as for the second variation of a6 plus 5 to prevent black from delivering a skewer, black would be able to play p7 plus 1, retreat the cannon, and once the left horse was able to be developed, black's left horse was able to be developed, black would have a very nice position going on. Black would not have to fear c6 equals to 7, because the chariot was just simply move away. So at this point in time, we can see that red's left flank was very congested, and the cannon would not have any good good intersections to move to later on in the game. If red tried to continue attacking, black would simply play e3 plus 5 to deny the red cannon any target, and also to protect the black horse at the same time. So a6 plus 5 would not be a good idea. Instead, p3 plus 1 would be advancing the third pawn, would be the move that was suggested. And since p3 plus 1 was played, black would try to develop his other chariot as a ranked chariot. Again, there was few sub-variations, so this would be the perhaps be the best move in this situation. A prophylactic move with e7 plus 5 is not advocated. Red would simply retreat his cannon, and if black tried to deliver a skewer, red would simply choose to play c6 equals to 7 boldly. Now, r3 plus 1 would not be the option at this point in time, because red could simply play c5 plus 4. Now this would be a check, because the black elephant had already moved to e7 plus 5. So because this was a check, black would lose his chariot so early in the game and still threaten the black cannon. So red would have the supreme advantage in this situation, which is why black cannot capture the horse. Now, at this point in time, a4 plus 5 would be played, and red would be much better in this situation. So that is why e7 plus 5 would be a very major blunder, because red would now have the option of capturing the central pawn to prevent any skewers, any possible skewers by the black pal corner cannon. r3 minus 1 to capture the black pawn would be another commonly seen tactic in these sorts of situations, but red would adjust his formation with c5 equals to 4. Now, when the cannons are placed in this manner at both the palace corners on the cannon rank, there's a special name for the cannon. This is called the crab eye cannons, or 蟹眼炮, 蟹 for Xie will be the Chinese for crab eye. So black will continue to capture the other pawn. And although black could have a 2-pawn advantage, the black chariot would have moved too many times. Now, would it be possible for black to capture the horse? The answer would be no, because black would have a very good move with c4 plus 7, whereby now both the black chariots will be under attack by the red cannons. So that is why black would not dare to capture the red horse. Instead, black would only dare to advance his chariot one intersection forward. However, when this is done, now it will be red's turn to retreat his cannon and to play c4 equals to 3 on the next move. So that is why retreating the chariot would also not be a good idea at this point in time. Instead, black should simply develop his left chariot, and once black does so, red would immediately control the 8th file with r9 equals to 8. It would not be a good idea for red to try to attack the left black horse at this point in time, as would be one of the common ways of attack after playing the double-headed snake pawns. This is because black would now play r9 equals to 2, and black would have a very satisfactory formation at this point in time. The cannon would now be protecting the horse, similar to the screen horse defense formation, and black would be prepared to play c6 equals to 7 to chase the red chariot away. Now, in this situation, as can be seen, because of black's r9 equals to 2, the red chariot will still have trouble being developed, and this would not be a very good this would not be very ideal for red at this point in time. So that is why r2 plus 6 would not be a good idea. Instead, red would be advised to play r9 equals to 8 to gain an open line. And if red played r9 equals to 8, black would move his chariot to this file and again prevent the red cannon from moving unnecessarily. Protecting the red cannon, and black would play a prophylactic move with his 4 plus 5. It would not be a good idea to advance the pawn to try to free the black horse at this point, because red would immediately adjust his formation, and black would now have trouble developing, because there will not be any good lines for the black chariots to move. And with c5 equals to 4, red would have the additional advantage of playing c4 plus 1. So this move would be very powerful, because it will not only discourage black from advancing his chariot to the pawn rank, it would also basically have stopped any possible counters by black. So p3 plus 1 is not a good idea. Instead, a4 plus 5 to consolidate the defense would be much better. And however, if a4 plus 5 played, red would take the opportunity to play r2 plus 6 and target the black horse at this point. So as mentioned earlier in the videos, one of the congenital weaknesses of black's sandwich horse defense would be this horse. So at this point in time, red would have the obvious advantage. So in this variation, a short recap. This will be the first variation that was discussed, p7 plus 1 by red. And as can be seen, red would still be able to hold the advantage going to the mid game. So the next major variation that was discussed was b3 plus 1. Was p7 plus 1 for black. Red would push his horse to the riverbank to discourage black from playing h7 plus 6. Now, at this point in time, black would choose to protect and consolidate his central file with moving one of the advisors. a6 plus 5 was the given move as the main line in variation 2. a4 plus 5 would also be viable, but it would lead to other very complicated situations. If a4 plus 5 were played, red would continue with r9 plus 2. Black would try to trade chariots, and red would now be prepared to target the black horse in this line. And at this point in time, red would have protected his pawn rank and have a very stable formation. It will be a very slow-paced situation at this point in time, but red would still have the overall advantage. So there are many other possible complicated situations that could arise. But generally speaking, a6 plus 5 would be better, but it would also lead to other complicated situations. Now, after a6 plus 5, red would choose to attack with r2 plus 6 for the pawn rank chariot. r9 plus 2, would it be viable at this point? Now, black would not allow the chariot to advance, so he would trade chariots. And after trading chariots, it will be a very even game, but black can be very satisfied with this outcome. So that is why r9 plus 2 was not a good idea, and red should not waste any time but charge his chariot across the river. And black would try to trade chariots again. What about protecting or consolidating the central file with e7 plus 5? Okay, would r1 plus equals to 3 be a good idea? No, because black would simply still try to trade chariots. So if h4 plus 6 would be played at this point in time, as black would try to threaten with the elbow horse attack. Black would have to deal with this situation and play r2 plus 1. Black should not cannot capture the red chariot because check, and red would checkmate with c6 equals to 4 on the next move. So that is why the chariot was poisoned. And black would have to protect and prevent the elbow horse attack with r2 plus 1. And if this was so, red would continue with r1 equals to 3, and at this point in time, black's position would be congested and red would have the extra pawn, which would be very valuable because the pawn would be able to cross the river without much hindrance. So that is why e7 plus 5 is not a good idea. Okay, if black offered to trade chariots, red would attack the horse. And at this point in time, there were two sub-variations that were discussed. The first would be c6 minus 1, and then the other one would be r8 plus 2 to protect the horse. Okay, I shall call this variation 2A and variation 2B for RE plus 2. Now in variation 2A, Black would retreat his cannon and prepare to attack the red chariot. Red would choose to play aggressively by capturing the pawn. Now this move has to be made because if Black tried to play c2, c6 equals to 7, Red would simply capture the black cannon and threaten to capture the black chariot and also go for the elbow horse attack, thus disallowing the black cannon to capture the red chariot at this point. So c2 plus 3 has to be played, and red will protect the horse, attacking the red chariot. And this would be a very nice move by red to develop his horse, because P with h7 minus 5, Black would not dare to play b5 plus 1 to capture the horse, or the black chariot would be lost. Now, would p5 plus 1 be a good idea to trade pawns? Let us see. Again, the red horse would have left, and at this point in time, this elephant would be a glaring weakness in Black's formation. That is why Black would play e3 plus 5 to prevent any smothered cannon checkmates from red. So at this point in time, p5 plus 1 would not be a good idea, because Black would have been able to cover up his weaknesses. And although Red's attack along the central file would seem very threatening, it was more bark than bite. So Black would have handled Red's aggressions very nicely. So that is why p5 plus 1 would not be a good idea. Instead, Red should have played h7 minus 5, because Red would now have the added advantage of advancing the pawn to capture material. And since Black retreated the horse and was prepared to play p7 plus 1, Black would have to advance his or move his chariot away. Now there are two ways to do so. One would be r2 plus 2, and the other would be r2 plus 3. But r2 plus 3 is not advocated, because Red would choose to trade horses, and within a few moves, this pawn would now be a major threat to Black, as it would be very close to the palace. So this would not be a ideal situation for Red at this point, for Black at this point. Hence, r2 plus 3 is not advocated. Instead, r2 plus 2 would be the better move, because if Red continued with p7 plus 1, Black could move the horse away, and this would force the red horse to move away also. Now, h5 minus 6 would also be okay. So sorry, h5 minus 6. Threatening to capture the black chariot and forcing the black chariot to advance. And red would continue to threaten to capture the black chariot again, forcing it to move. And red will finally be able to capture the central pawn. And although Black was threatening to capture the red horse, Red could counter with his move to block the horse and allow the red horse to threaten to capture the black horse at this point. And the central cannon was now protecting the red horse. So, although Black could lack a central pawn, Black would still be able to handle Red's aggressions, and this would still be a very satisfactory outcome for Black. So So p4 plus 1 is a good idea. And capturing, it was advocated that black should capture the horse with this move. Now trading chariots would not be a good idea because red would not be delivering a check and black would lose his chariot. So that is why r4 plus 1 would be a nice move, and black would be able to handle red's aggressions. So h5 minus 6 would also be viable, but it will lead to a slightly different situation as should be seen on this in variation 2. Red will take the opportunity to play r9 plus 2, so that if black played r2 equals to 3, the black chariot could play r9 equals to 7 to protect or offer a trade-off material. Now c1 equals to 3 was given in the move, although h1 plus 3 might have been a better play. Now red would have captured an elephant in this situation, but black would be threatening with the horse and chariot at this point in time. However, red would still have the slight advantage in this situation. So that is why c1 equals to 3 was given as the main line, because red would now threaten to capture the elephant and try to gain some momentum in attacking. The pawn move away, and black would still insist on capturing the elephant. And to prevent the elephant from being captured, red would sacrifice, or this would be a pseudo sacrifice, his central cannon, and with e7 plus 5, the black chariot would be forced to move, and red would now be able to capture the horse and still have his pawn intact. So red would have a slight pawn advantage at this point in time. So this wraps up the two major variations in the fourth part of chapter 8. And this will also be the last part in chapter 8, and I'll try to do the chapter 9 video tutorials soon. For those who want to go ahead, I've already uploaded the boards and their variations onto the site, so please feel free to go to chapter 9 if you're confident. So I hope you have enjoyed this short video tutorial, and I hope to see you soon. And please subscribe to the channel if you like the work that I've been doing to try to promote Xiangqi. Thank you and have a nice weekend ahead.